Hello again. Welcome to Exodus Mini number 13. We're going to be looking at the eighth plague of the locusts out of Exodus 10 verses 1 to 20. Again, this is kind of a longer text, and so I'm going to jump right into things. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his officials, so that I may do these miraculous signs of mine among them. And so that you may tell your son and your grandsons how severely I dealt with the Egyptians and performed miraculous signs among them, and you will know that I am the Lord." So Moses and Aaron went in to Pharaoh and told him, "This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. How long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, that they may worship me. But if you refuse to let my people go, then tomorrow I will bring locusts into your territory. They will cover the surface of the land so that no one will be able to see the land. They will eat the remainder left to you that escaped the hail. They will eat every tree you have growing in the field. They will fill your houses, all your officials' houses, and the houses of all the Egyptians, something your fathers and grandfathers never saw since the time they occupied the land until today." Then he turned and left Pharaoh's presence. And Pharaoh's officials asked him, "How long must this man be a snare to us? Let the men go, so that they may worship the Lord their God. Don't you realize yet that Egypt is devastated?" So Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh, and "Go worship the Lord your God," Pharaoh said. "But exactly who will be going?" And Moses replied, "We will go with our young and with our old. We will go with our sons and with our daughters, with our flocks and with our herds, because we must hold the Lord's festival." And he said to them, "The Lord would have to be with you if I would ever let you and your families go. Look out, you're headed for trouble. No, go just able-bodied men. Worship the Lord, since that's what you want." And they were driven from Pharaoh's presence. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand and cover the land of Egypt, and the locusts will come over it and eat every plant in the land and everything that the hail left." And so Moses stretched out his staff over the land of Egypt, and the Lord sent an east wind over the land all that day and through the night. By morning, the east wind had brought in the locusts. The locusts went up over the entire land of Egypt, settled on the whole territory of Egypt. Never before had there been such a large number of locusts, and there will never be again. And they covered the surface of the whole land, so that the land was black. And they consumed all the plants of the ground, and all the fruit on the trees that the hail had left. Nothing green was left on the trees or the plants in the field throughout the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh urgently sent for Moses and Aaron and said, "I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Please forgive my sins once more, and make an appeal to the Lord your God, so that he will just take this death away from me." And Moses left Pharaoh's presence and appealed to the Lord. Then the Lord changed the wind to a strong west wind, and it carried off the locusts and blew them into the Red Sea. Not a single locust was left in all the territory of Egypt. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the Israelites go. Let's just jump right into the potential deities that are being addressed in this eighth plague. As I've said over and over again through these plagues, there's a whole host that we could talk about, and I'm actually only going to give you a few that we can address here. The first is Min, M-I-N. Min is the patron god of the crop, and really we could have talked about Min in the in the seventh plague also, and probably many of the other plagues are being affected by the crops. But what's really interesting about this, and why Min kind of comes up to the top, is that when the harvest is happening with the hail, when all of that is taking place, is probably in January, and that's when the crops would have come into harvest in Egypt at that time. The barley and the flax would have been ripe in January, and so that had taken place. But then we're told that there is two more crops, wheat and spelt, that are later crops. Well, when did those get harvested? Well, those get harvested a few months later, maybe February or March. Now, we know that the Israelites are going to exit around April or May, depending on what time of the year it would have been, what the harvest season would have been, right? Because their calendars are different than ours. Like, we know this because of Passover, because that's when Passover is, that's when the harvest is, that's when the month is, and all the other kind of stuff that goes along with this. So somewhere in the middle of the seventh plague and the 10th plague is January, from January to April, and right smack in the middle of that is the harvest of the wheat and spelt, which coincides with one of the biggest festivals in Egypt, which is the festival to the god Min, the god of the crops. And so we could make a fairly educated guess and say that maybe this plague actually happens at the time when they are supposed to be worshiping the god Min, the god of the crops. And we can see this right in the last plague, in the seventh plague. The flax and the barley were destroyed because the barley was ripe in the field and was not budding, but then the wheat and the spelt had not been destroyed because they are later crops. Again, later crops, probably February or March. There's also Isis. We've talked about Isis, who is one of the chief goddesses of the people, the goddess of life, of motherhood, of things like that. A god of protection, would be protecting many of these under gods. Nepri is one of the other gods of grain. Anubis, which is the guardian of the fields, and this is another one that we kind of ask this question: where are the protecting gods? Where are the protection gods that are happening? Senehet is again a protector against pests in the field, right? So we have something similar. We spray our fields with pesticides. That's essentially the same thing that they were doing, just in the ancient mind, right? They were praying to the god of pestilence, praying to the god of protection against pests, and he is failing. The locusts are a pest, and they come in and they devastate the land. They devastate the land, and arguably devastate the land for a good long time, right? This is going to be a very painful thing for the Egyptians to overcome, right? Additionally, we could ask that same question in light of all of these different plagues at this point, right? We could take that picture one step further when we're talking about if I would spray my field with a pesticide, and then that season everything in the field dies, I bet you're gonna not use that product again, right? And it's interesting, we can see that parallel in our own kind of cultural mindset, but this is exactly what is happening here in Egypt. All of these gods are miserably failing. And what we're going to find whenever the Exodus happens is that many in Egypt, maybe not many, but at least some in Egypt, are convinced and go with the people of Israel when they leave Egypt. And so some of what is happening is not only making God's name known in all of the land, but it's making God's name known in the land of Egypt and winning souls. The one other God that I think we can talk about at this point, and while I might lean a little bit more towards Min, in the story, I also feel like we can address Set or Seth. Set is a god, the god of war, chaos, storms, and pestilence. More than any other gods in ancient Egyptian mythology, Set reminds us of a Christian picture of Satan, right? Is a God who is typically considered to be evil, considered to be bad. And you're not praying to that God to fix things. There's just a reality of this evil force that exists in the ancient world and is causing destruction. Where he's called, Set means the instigator of confusion or the destroyer, right? Really, along with Marduk in Babylonian mythology, Marduk and Set are the two gods that are most often associated with Satan in Christian mythology. Like they're the two that most often secular people will go, oh, they just stole that from this particular deity, right? And that's a different conversation altogether. But Set is also the God who would be let go whenever all of this stuff is happening. So whenever bad things are happening, we're usually going to point to this guy and go, it's because of him, it's his fault. But the question that we maybe ask is, where is the logic and the attack from the people of Egypt? Why are they not, again, coming to the God of war and asking him to send the pestilence on another nation? Why is this pestilence not happening to the Israelites? It's only happening to us. Set, you're failing us. Why are they not calling upon the God of war to protect them? Why are they not realizing? Well, very, very plainly, because they likely are, and he's not answering. And why is he not answering? Because even when we take into account the powers and principalities of darkness, they do not stand a candle. They do not stand in the presence of God, of the God of the universe, right? A few more things as we wrap up. The officials are starting to see the truth, right? And Pharaoh's officials asked him, how long are we going to let this man be a thorn? Let them go and worship their God. Don't you know that Egypt is devastated? The officials around Pharaoh are starting to see it, but his heart is still very hard. Pharaoh is bending. He's bending just a little. Go and worship the Lord your God, right? He understands what they're saying, but is he broken yet? No, he's not broken yet, because ultimately he will turn against and change his mind. We will let our young and our old and everybody will go, because this is what we must do to hold our festival. And then this is what Pharaoh says in response. The Lord would have to be with, right? Like he's so shocked at this response from Pharaoh. He would have to be with you in order for me to let all of you go. No, you're heading for trouble. You're out of your mind, is what Pharaoh says here. He's like, you gotta wake up and smell the coffee, right? Like the idea that I'm just gonna simply let all of you go is absolutely absurd. So he's bending, but he is not yet broken. He's not bending all the way. And again, we see him confess a sin. I have sinned against, but look at the growth here. I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. In the seventh plague, it just simply says, I have sinned. Here, I have sinned against Yahweh. Now, is this remorse or is this repentance? I think that this, again, is remorse. I think I've been caught in something that I can't control, and so I'm going to say the things that I need to say. But there is something growing. There is an intensity that is happening in these plagues, and even Pharaoh is starting to see it. Please forgive me once again for my sin, and make an appeal to the Lord. And Moses, interestingly, just does it. He doesn't respond, you're going to harden your heart and anything like that. He just simply does it. Again, maybe it's because we're in the middle of the third, right? We're in this eighth plague, which is the second of the three of that last plague, and that's this pattern that's being laid out. And then lastly, we almost have to make an assumption, right? Because it says, but if you refuse to let my people go, this is before the plague happens back in verse 4, then tomorrow will bring locusts onto your territory. And It's a little bit speculative that maybe this is happening in all of the land of Egypt, but it sure seems like the implication is these locusts are only coming to the people of Egypt. Once again, leaving the people of Israel unharmed and unscathed. And again, it reminds us of God's protection and provision of his people who are seeking him in even the darkest of times. So that is the 8th plague, the plague of the locusts. We'll see you in the next one.